Medical options, critical survival kit supplies. Hello, my friends. This is The Art of Prepping. Hope you guys are doing well today. In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the more important essentials in your medical kit that can be found in your survival kit. So let's begin. Tourniquets is going to be a very important element of your trauma supplies. I would have a minimum of 2 tourniquets per person in your group. So if you have a family of 3 and your kit is for your family, then I would have 6 tourniquets. And I would have at least a couple Sharpie markers so that you can record on the tourniquet the time of application if you had to use the tourniquets. I'd also have a good handful of pressure dressings, chest seals in case there's any type of compromise to the body that could potentially collapse the lungs, wound packing gauze. I'd also have emergency blankets to help against going into shock. Trauma shears. These are devices that have been designed to cut material and not your skin. Tweezers. There might be a time that you have things embedded in your body that you need to be removed, and so tweezers can help you do that. Instead of latex gloves, I would use like nitrile medical gloves. You may come across someone that you don't know, and they may have an infectious disease, but you need to give them CPR. So in this case, it's good to have a portable option. It's typically referred to as a CPR mask or a CPR shield mask, but they're very lightweight and very compact, and they typically have like a one-way valve system, and basically it's just a barrier between you and them, but you can help them, and at the same time, they're not going to hurt you. Hemostatic dressings. This is something that for some people, they prefer just to go with more wound packing gauze, but there is a place for hemostatic dressings. It just depends on your training, but I'm a big fan of having options, so I include both wound packing gauze and hemostatic dressings. Tape. This is something that I think it's really important to have because you can makeshift various medical supplies to be more versatile and more flexible. So medical tape is a must, but also I keep a small roll of duct tape in my kit. Antiseptic wipes and solutions. So the wipes are going to be prepackaged and you just pull them out as needed, but the solution could be something like small bottles of hydrogen peroxide. Super glue can be used in a pinch. There's a lot of controversy about using this, but if you're in the backcountry and you're days away from getting to an emergency room and you have a pretty serious open wound and you're having a hard time keeping it from bleeding, maybe you don't have tape or, the proper medical supplies, but you have super glue, it could be something that you could use. Just know, though, that they're going to have to remove that super glue, and it could cause some additional damage to your wound site. Antibiotic ointments. This can be easily found in a tube, but you can also get Band-Aids that have antibiotic solutions and ointments embedded into the Band-Aid. I like to have both. I like to have the standalone tube. I like to have Band-Aids with it embedded, and of course also Band-Aids that are just sterile and plain, because there are situations that you don't want anything on the Band-Aid. You just want a dry Band-Aid. Splints. You can get very small form factor folding splints. It is fairly common for someone to have an injury to the limb and a need to stabilize that limb. It could be that you just pulled a muscle really bad or fractured a bone or broken a bone as well. And so a splint can save the day. Thermometers can help, help understand what the body temperature is, to know that if you have some type of possible, infection or fever, if you're like just overheated or you're hypothermic, things like that. Pain meds. Pain meds is another very controversial subject. Everybody typically has their tolerances for certain things and their intolerances. Pain meds overall can do a lot of damage to the body, in particular the gut lining, and that can go and cause problems down the road. In particular, it can cause leaky gut syndrome and cause the immune system to overreact and cause antibodies or to produce antibodies against food. And so we have to be very careful to protect the lining of the gut. So only use prescription and over-the-counter pain medicines when you really have to use it. What I personally try to use is more the natural remedies that don't have the side effects and the fallout like you typically see in the mainstream over-the-counter pain meds. And so just one example of many that I use just for aches and pains, which I typically don't get a lot of aches and pains, but when I do, I like to use white willow, and it's the white willow bark. And this mimics aspirin, but it doesn't have any of the side effects. Very safe to use. Another thing to have in your medical kit would be antihistamines. And this is something that if, you can get a bug bite or get stung by a creature. And for some people, you can have serious reactions, maybe even going so far as anaphylactic shock. And so in some people's situation, if you really have a history of extreme reactions, extreme histamine reactions, or autoimmune reactions, maybe an EpiPen would be a solution. So you might want to carry a few of those in your kit, EpiPens. And also for the average person though, Benadryl could be a solution. For some people though, there's side effects to Benadryl that's not desirable. One of the things that I use, it's fairly mild, but yet effective. And it's called bromelain. It's actually an extract from the rind of pineapple. And it has antihistamine and anti-inflammatory properties. It works very well for me. I think it's really smart to have anti-diarrhea medicine just to help prevent dehydration. And talking about that, we have to kind of focus on electrolytes too. I would have some electrolyte replacements in an emergency. And that could be small packets that you make yourself of pink Himalayan salt. You could put some supplements in there as well to help create electrolytes, such as potassium and also magnesium. And I would go with the magnesium citrate and the potassium citrate. They typically absorb better than other types. Triangular bandages. I'd have several of those in there because you can make slings out of it. You can make head wraps. You can do a lot with those. So definitely have at least a handful of those, in my opinion, would be very smart. An eye rinse. You can get small bottles of sterile water and definitely can be used for eye rinse. That's one of the things that I always worry about is if you're out in the brush and you have an eye injury, what do you do? I mean, it's a difficult situation. I would try to stabilize that area as much as possible. And if you can rinse it out, that's fine. But if there's actually something that's embedded in your eye, once again, stabilize the eye. It may be taking some gauze, impacting it with, the eye area, the ocular cavity with gauze, and then taping that up just to create a stable area. Hot packs. This may be useful if you're caught out in very cold environments and you're becoming hypothermic. Cold packs, if you're in a very hot environment and you're overheating. And so by mentioning all this, it should be pretty obvious that this stuff makes really good additions, and this makes up really good essentials, medical options, if you will, for a survival kit or preparedness kits in general. But it's really good to have some of this medical supplies, if not all of this, would be really ideal, just at home and at work and in your vehicle. So regardless of where your main survival kit is, you'll still have medical options that are going to be very practical and usable in various environments. I'd even go so far to have a very comprehensive trauma kit at your bug out location. So what are some of the most common medical emergencies? I did some research online, and then I called the 2 hospitals in my area, the 2 closest hospitals. And I talked to the emergency department, and they gave me kind of a list here. Now, this is not complete. They didn't include everything possible that they deal with, but they gave me some of the more common emergency things that come through their doors. This should not come as a large surprise about, what I'm about to say, but it is quite interesting. So they didn't really mention much about like pulled muscles or torn muscles or even like fractures or bones, like broken bones. I'm sure that they deal with that, but they didn't even include that. They didn't mention that. What they did mention, though, and of course, the reason I'm bringing all this up is just so that you can build skills to have solutions for these things. So that you're not just caught, by surprise and you don't know how to deal with when these things happen. But they said bleeding, and we're not talking like a paper cut, and we're not talking about just a simple nosebleed, but we're talking about trauma that the wound site won't stop bleeding, or they can't seem to get it to stop. So that's something there. Uncontrolled bleeding, seizures. I was a little surprised with this one. I knew that people dealt with seizures, but the emergency room department was telling me that over the lifetime of the population, 10% of people will experience seizures. So that was a little surprising. Allergic reactions. It could be food allergies. That can be one of the reasons that people go in and have anaphylactic shock. But once again, it could be a bug bite. It could be something like that. They got stung by some kind of insect. Heart attacks. And heart attacks is kind of on a continuum. There's like minor heart attacks, and then there's, those that people don't survive. But so there's a whole range. These days, though, the medical department can do a lot to save you and reverse the issues when you have heart conditions. So that they're getting very good at dealing with heart attacks. But it is very common, though, unfortunately. And strokes are also something that's a little more common than people think. There's like transient strokes, they were telling me, and then there's like different types of strokes that you can have. And they were saying that there's a couple ways that you can kind of get a slight indicator if you have had a stroke or are having one. One of the tests is that you can ask the person to smile. And if one side of the face is droopy and they're both sides of their mouth don't curl up in a smile, then that's one indicator that they could be having a stroke or have had a stroke. You can ask them to talk and hear them say a few sentences. And is it coherent? Are they able to pronunciate their words? You can do bilateral movements. Ask them to move their eyes from side to side to pass the midline of their body. You can ask them to hold things or to grab things or squeeze things, and also to move their hands and arms past the midline of their body. So taking their arm, like their left arm, and moving it over to their right side of their body. And if they can't do these things easily at all, or they struggle with these things, they might be having a stroke or have had a stroke. And there's other tests as well, but this is just to kind of get you thinking. And so obviously, if you've had someone that's acting very off, you need to get them help. If someone's had a heart attack or stroke, you don't want to be sitting around and say, well, just take a nap and you might feel better in a few hours. No, you need to get them help because they could perish. And so we have also breathing issues. I don't think that they're talking about just exclusively like COPD, but breathing difficulties in terms of I think they're talking about possibly elements of shock or maybe allergic reactions. Those could be things I think that they're talking about. But nonetheless, when you can't seem to get air, and of course, this also could involve the elderly population, the geriatric population, because there are some people that may have smoked or been around environmental hazards all their life, and their lungs could be compromised. and their lungs may not be very efficient at extracting oxygen. Could be that they have hemoglobin problems. It could be a lot of things, but definitely, apparently that's a pretty big issue that they deal with, putting people on oxygen and stabilizing their oxygen blood levels. Another issue that they talked about is eye trauma. This is one that I don't like. Once again, they talk about foreign bodies, foreign, elements in eyes. It's just disgusting. But can you imagine though, if that happened to you and you lost your eyesight or you have something stuck in your eye? Once again, they told me that, the best thing you can do is to stabilize that area and just to get help as soon as possible. Panic attacks. Now, this is the last one on the list that I'm going to talk about here today in this video, but this one is a very large issue. And they both hospitals took quite a bit of time to kind of highlight this. This is not something that just kind of happens from time to time in the population. But in the general population, there's a very large number of people that are labeled with panic and anxiety disorders, or at least episodes that come into the emergency room. And so why is this? They gave me a lot of reasons, and someone that is someone that used to work in the healthcare field. I'm aware of this on a deeper level. I'm trying to keep this as basic as possible, though, for just people watching this so that the video isn't too long. But there's a lot of people that are overwhelmed with life. They don't have good coping mechanisms. There's a lot of people that are influenced by their past, and they kind of live in the past. And then there's also people who are very fearful of the future, and they will dwell on the future. Like they'll have literally like fantasies, but they're fearful of these fantasies coming true, like these negative fantasies, or they'll pick a time in the past that's just dreadful, and they just kind of linger in that. And so what we've seen over time is that there's this fixation that occurs, and there's this habit that occurs, and it's a vicious cycle. And until you surrender and you leave that cycle and you replace it with something else, and this typically occurs when you condition your body to change the way you think. And this is kind of in contrast to what a lot of people believe. They think, you change your mind and then your body feels better. But really, the science is very clear that once your body starts to act normal, then it convinces the mind that everything's okay. So if you go out and exercise, and if you laugh and you relax, then your mind's going to say, whoa, everything's okay. And I don't have to sit here and stress and worry and panic. So it's something that when you start to pull inwardly and you focus on yourself and not be so external, all this externalized fear or worry, if you get away from that and you come inside yourself, you focus on your internal behaviors and activities, and you are in the present moment, that's where you get a lot of the peace right there. So it is the focus on the present moment, and that really, really starts the process of, I guess if you want to call it, healing from all this very negative lifestyle. And deep breathing and being aware of the deep breathing and grounding your body, being aware of the contact points that your body makes with the environment. These things over time, in conjunction with getting enough sleep and reducing your stress, especially in the home and at work, and having quiet time, like literally just not being in chaos all day long, and eating good food, making sure you have good hydration, all these things matter. They matter a lot, and people minimize all this. They say, it doesn't matter if I got 6 hours or 8 hours, but it does. It really does, because it's harder to deal with stress in life if you don't have the resources to work with. So if you don't have the sleep, then you don't have the rest to work with. And if you're not rested, then it's hard to be at your optimum. Just like food, if you don't get the nutrients that you need for your body to be optimized, then you're not optimized. You will be cranky. You will have mood fluctuations more so than not. And you can be more stressed. And when once again, you get more stressed, you might be more anxious about whatever. And at some point, that anxiety can kind of spill over into panic because you're trying to cope and your body's trying to warn you that there's all this danger when it's not. It's just that you are so out of balance that you're not even aware of it. And so definitely learn and understand that this is a problem that society has on a very deep level. And so people will have all kinds of symptoms when they have a panic issue. You know, they feel like that maybe they're having a heart attack, that they're lightheaded, that they turn kind of pale. They might have tingling in various limbs. There's all kinds of crazy symptoms that you can have when you're having panic issues or anxiety. And so sometimes to the newbie, you know, to the person who is kind of learning about this, and it's kind of an amateur level, it's easy to think that, oh, someone's got some serious stuff going on, when it's probably just panic in a lot of cases, because their body or their mind is overreacting. They perceive a threat, but it's not even a real threat. So I just want to leave it at that there are things in terms of material support that we need, and that's going to be our medical supplies. And then we have medical skills. So you want to skill build and learn how to deal with certain type of conditions and situations that could happen that pertain to our well-being. And then you want to really focus on those things that are not life-threatening, but yet what people go through. Once again, it could be panic and anxiety. And bringing them down a few notches could be a difference between them being able to function or not. And so if you're in a survival situation and you have someone that's literally not able to cope with the situation, the best thing you can do for them is to show them that they can cope and that they're doing just fine. And that wherever they are in their head is not beneficial. And then they can make a choice. And they can think about different things. But once again, you want to start with the body. You want the body to be the means to prime the mind of where you want to go, what kind of experience that you want to have. Because ultimately, we as humans only interact with the world through our senses. It's not like we actually know what the world looks like. It's not that we actually know what the world feels like. We only know what information that our brain decodes through our organs and our senses. So our eyes take in light that's reflected at different frequencies and wavelengths. And so we perceive things in different colors and shapes because of this light. And our brain does the best it can to make sense of it. And the same thing with our skin, for example. We feel like that we're touching things in the world, but it's just our sensory input and these little electrical impulses that go to our brain, and our brain decodes it and says, okay, this is a piece of cloth that you're touching, and that is a piece of steel, or that over there is a blade of grass. And so it's not that we're literally touching and experiencing these things for real. Like we don't really have a one-on-one direct connection with anything because we have to go through our senses. And I think it's something just to be aware of, is that our entire experience, the entire human experience, is based on our perception of the world. And that's very powerful, because if we internally come to a conclusion of how the world is, then we can change that as well. If we are in control, which we are, and our brain and our body's working to try to understand and decode all this sensory information that's around us 24/7. And we only take a very, very small percent of all this information around us, because our body cannot process all this sensory information. It can't process all the sounds and all the different types of interactions, like just light and everything that's here. There's a lot of stuff going on. And so we filter almost all of it. We just kind of like, from what I understand, we pretty much just get to some of the most important, or at least what we believe to some of the most important information. We keep that and we filter out pretty much 90+% of everything else around us, because we would not be able to function if we were to try to take it all in. And so the unconscious mind is aware of a lot more than our conscious mind. But our conscious mind has to be limited so that we can function. Because once again, there's just too much information out there. We would just be so confused and so overwhelmed all the time. So we have this bottleneck built in. And that bottleneck is between the unconscious to the conscious. So in the big picture, we want to be mindful that we create our own reality to some degree. That's not just something that people say. Like when you like read about physics and more of the quantum biology aspects that we can know about, is that we are having a unique experience. That we are choosing to a large degree, either consciously or unconsciously, how we interpret the data that's coming in and what we prioritize. And of course, the history of experiences will determine a lot of this as well. And the notion that we have complete free will and we have the ability to choose and that we're completely free as a creature is really probably not true at all. I do honestly believe in free will. I think we do have choice. We have free will. But it's probably a very limited amount in the big picture of things, because we have this history of biology and we have this habitual interpretation process, and we have all this experience that builds up to a totality of our understanding of what it is to be alert and alive and to experience life. And so while we have choices, they're much more limited than most people realize. And I think it's really interesting to try to use, though, and maximize, and this is what I try to do on a daily basis, is to maximize my freedoms that the choices that I can make, to do the very best that I can to maximize those, because they're very powerful, but there's so few of them to make. And so there's a lot of things that we're just on autopilot. I mean, just think about yesterday, for example. I mean, did you really have to consciously think much about going through your day? For most people, in most situations, you're just kind of going through the motions. You've developed habits and behaviors to satisfy the requirements to get through situations. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been at work or I've been in my vehicle and I don't even, recognize the movement of time. There's been times I've been driving for a half an hour or an hour and I don't almost remember any of it. Like consciously, I don't remember putting any effort to even drive. Or there's times I get lost in a movie, for example. I mean, how many times has that happened? And sometimes you don't even remember much of it. You just kind of get that, I think they call it the delta wave. And you kind of almost get in a hypnotic, state of watching a movie and you just kind of zone out. And I'm not saying that most of life is that way, but a lot of life is very much in sync with habitual doing. Because if you really break it down, we sleep. I mean, for some of us, it's easily a third of our life is sleep. And then we have hours that we eat and, hygienic things like, groom ourselves and keep ourselves clean. We have several hours a day. We do those things. And then we have a bunch of time that we do things to live, which we call work. And so it's pretty amazing how all this kind of goes through the motion fairly effortlessly. I mean, if you really consciously try to think about these things when you're going through them, you might be a little surprised about all the nuances that you've just developed a propensity to just do. I mean, just think about how complex some of these things that we do almost automatically. And So over time, we've kind of said to ourselves, okay, we've created some solutions, and here they are. And we were going to like want to reproduce those or replicate those. And so we get into these habitual cycles, and as long as they keep satisfying, our needs, then why would we change? But sometimes we can change for the better, though. Sometimes we can improve our situation. And that's the whole key here, is to focus on betterment of self. And to do that, you have to really stop and try to really increase your level of consciousness, because otherwise you'll just drone out and go back to your default habitual cycle. And so the reason I bring this up is that health is a lot more than just physical. And it's also mental, of course, and it's also just a biological state. And then I would even go so far as to say, because I believe that we're spiritual beings, that there's this whole other element of the spirit body that is probably the more true self, if anything. And the spirit body, some people call it the soul, whatnot, but that might be, what really defines us. If we had to say who are we and what are we? And the body might just be this host mechanism. It might just be this element that allows us to interact in this dimensional world that we live in. I think it's very fascinating, though, of how much we don't know and how much we're trying to learn. It's pretty amazing. So I know that I got a little bit off the path there, but I just want to include those things because humans are not simple creatures. Things are actually quite complicated. And if you want to replace the word complicated with something else that's also very valid, maybe we're just very interesting. Maybe we're just so full of potential. Maybe it's just that in some ways we're almost limitless. And because of that, I think that we need to be mindful of our potential. And one of the things that we can do is to help each other. And one of those helpful things that we can do is to be available to intervene when someone is having a personal crisis or they're having a medical emergency. And that's one of the motivations of this video, is to say, hey, of all the things that we can do in our life, some things are much more powerful than others. And having the means to step in and save someone's life or to prevent serious suffering is a worthwhile venture. It's worthwhile. And so I have very high respect for those people who work in the medical field. As much as I disagree with some of the things that go on in the medical field in the modern day, I still very much respect the overall intention that a lot of people have that go into the field. And I think it's really sad to see mainstream medical, just the industry, the mainstream industrial medical field, how they are migrating in a direction that is more influenced by certain people than others, and how they're not open to being more flexible and open-minded as they should. There's a lot of very interesting solutions, if you want to call them, to certain medical problems, but there's an agenda in the medical field, just like pretty much any other field. And so there's propaganda and there's politics all through the medical field. And so it's up to us, though, to kind of dig a little deeper to find solutions that are going to be better for us than what's just given and normalized. Because I don't think that's what we want to settle on. We don't want to, just going back to pain meds, for example, we don't want to hurt our body because we're taking pain meds. If you're taking so-called medicine, quote unquote, you don't want to be injured from the medicine. But in these days, you see that. You see that almost all the mainstream medicines have side effects. Some of them are very bad. I mean, just look at chemotherapy, for example. I mean, literally, it's a poison. And here you have someone that has a condition, a disease state, if you will, cancer, for example, that they're already dying. They're already, they already have what you would call like poison, if you will, in the form of cancer in their body. But the medical field thinks that it's the best thing to do is to give them more poison to kill the poison, or give them poison to kill the toxins. And while it does work sometimes, there's plenty of cases, you don't even have to look hard at all, of, yeah, it kills the cancer, but it also completely wipes out the immune system and kills the person as well. So the mainstream medical model, I mean, in the modern day at least, it seems to be very poor, and it seems to not really make a lot of sense. It does sometimes do more harm than good. And to me, that's not logical. So I think we need to really have our radar up and going and be alert and be mindful of what really is going on. Is the medical field in the business of getting us healthy and back to a balance that allows us to live a healthy and happy life? Or is it more about symptom management? Is it about us just getting hooked on their medicines for a long period of time so they can make money? Because if you really look, the mainstream medical model, it doesn't almost ever give you solutions for a cure. It's almost so they just take care of symptoms, because they don't want you really to get better. Because if you get better, then you're not a customer anymore. So that's why I think we need to look at alternative options and look at natural means of how we can use our food and what is in the natural world to heal us. And a lot of times it can just be that how we think about the world. It's just a perceptual issue. So I'm going to end this conversation with that. And I just want to just thank you for your ongoing support and invite you to check out my other videos, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And if you know other people that you would think that they could enjoy this content, share the video with friends and family. I really do appreciate that. So going forward, let me know in this video, just in the comment section, what kind of medical supplies, options, if you will, that you would include in your kit, or anything that I left out. And if you work in the emergency room or in a hospital, are there other conditions that I left out that you would want to highlight to be prepared to help, to help someone through if someone was going through something that was very dangerous to their health and their well-being. And overall, how do you perceive how society copes? Do you think that we're coping better than we used to? Or we have, less impressive means of coping? And so, once again, thanks for your support and your time. Hope you enjoyed the video. You guys take care.